This meeting to order. We are continuing our study of threat analysis and the Canadian Armed Forces operational readiness to meet those threats. This has been an outstanding study, and we've had outstanding witnesses, and today's panel is no exception. Admiral Auchterlonie has a hard stop at 4:30, and there's rumors of interruptions. I'm seeking unanimous consent from everyone that we will be able to continue our meeting until any vote is called in the next hour, because I don't want to lose the time. And I've talked to the Conservatives, I've talked to the Liberals, I haven't talked to the NDP, but I've talked to the Bloc, and so that we use the time. So I need a motion for unanimous consent to carry on. You're looking.
Okay, so carry on until what point? So when the bells start, then we go on and get ready for the vote.
The bells are ringing already?
The bells are ringing already.
We started the meeting already. So
yeah, I suppose we did.
Did we?
I suppose, yes,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah, you
And in theory, I have to stop it unless I have unanimous consent to continue on with the meeting.
Are they 30-minute bells or 15-minute bells?
30.
30.
Well, we might as well make use of the 30 minutes.
Will we be given specific? Time, like in suspension to vote, or?
Yeah, when the vote is called, or when the whips call the vote, we have to suspend. Okay, so we'll use this 30 minutes, and or 25 or whatever it is, and then yeah, and we should be good.
We're gonna have to, the whips have to talk about it because this is a.
Okay, with that, procedures out of the way. We certainly squeezed that one in. I'll call on Admiral Auchterlonie first to give his 5 minutes, and then General Wright after that, and we'll go as long as we can go before we have to suspend. I dare say, Admiral Auchterlonie, that will probably be it by the time we vote afterwards for you. But if General Wright can stay around, that would be helpful before we impanel our next set of panelists. But we'll see how that plays through. So, again, I apologize for all of this procedural stuff, but welcome to the ways of democracy. So, anyway, Admiral Auchterlonie, 5 minutes, please.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome. I'm Vice Admiral Bob Auchterlonie, Chief of Joint Operations and Commander of our Canadian Forces Operations. Canadian Joint Operations Command, or CJOC, is the force employer. My role is to take our forces and deploy them in operations, whether that's domestically, in North America, or anywhere in the world, including on NATO, coalition, or UN operations. Since CJOC is focused on the employment of our forces, we're also very aware of the threats to Canada and the threats those forces need to address. Domestically, we have just been through 2 years of a global health threat. We've been conducting Operation Laser, and this has seen the Canadian Armed Forces involved in support to long-term care facilities, local and northern communities, and assisting other government departments with their planning and logistics. The Canadian Armed Forces also helped organize and support the distribution of vaccines across Canada and to our deployed CAF members and other government departments around the world through Operation Vector. Though the Canadian Armed Forces should always be considered a force of last resort, in these cases, the demonstrated effects of changing climate have also created greater demand for the CAF resources and support. And it's not just natural disasters or otherwise traditional threats that pose a risk here at home. We have seen an increase in cyber attacks in our private and public spheres. We have seen growing assertiveness and aggressiveness in the Arctic from our strategic competitors, deliberate mis- and disinformation, strategies aimed at both the Canadian Armed Forces and Canadians, and new and ever-emerging technologies that range from below threshold to open conflict. Continentally, the rise of strategic competition, changing threats to the continent, the effects of climate change, and a growing importance of the Canadian Arctic requires that we strengthen our domestic and continental defenses. Canada and the US are working together to modernize the North American Aerospace Defense Command including strengthening situational awareness, modernizing command and control systems, enhancing the capabilities of infrastructure, particularly in the Arctic, and advancing research, development, and innovation. Also on the continental defense front, the Canadian Armed Forces has spent the last 15 years conducting Operation Carib, where alongside our US and other partners in the region, we have sought to suppress trafficking in international waters. But now we're seeing strategic competitors move into that region as well. Both Russia and China, using different methods, are working to establish themselves in the region. We saw this in Africa 10 years ago, and that same playbook is unfolding before our eyes in our own hemisphere. With respect to regional and global threats, globally, Canada is supporting the existing rules-based international order and can best advance our interests through multilateralism, through alliances, and through coalitions. Operationally, the Canadian Armed Forces seek to address these threats via our deployments in concert with allies. Of course, Russia's unprovoked aggression against Ukraine is the most blatant and obvious of these threats. We continue to reinforce and deploy our deployed forces in Latvia and elsewhere in Europe as part of our NATO commitments. While paused, our training mission in Ukraine, Operation Unifier, is also specifically aimed at reinforcing the Ukrainian Armed Forces' ability to defend itself against Russian aggression. And while the current conflict in Europe certainly has taken a lot of attention and resources, we must also keep active with the Indo-Pacific region, where the future of the rules-based international order is being challenged by Beijing. Thanks to the deployment of 2 frigates to the Indo-Pacific in 2021, the Canadian Armed Forces has made tangible contributions alongside like-minded nations to uphold the rules-based international order. Of note, HMCS Winnipeg participated in multinational exercises with the UK-led Queen Elizabeth Strike Group in the South China Sea, as well as cooperative deployments with 2 Australian warships through the Spratly Islands. The Canadian Armed Forces must be prepared to respond to challenges against the long-standing norms and international law and affect the rights of all nations to operate peacefully in the international commons, whether on the sea or in the air. Such activities fundamentally undermine the rules-based international order, which has served us so well since the end of the Second World War. That is why we are closely working with our allies and why I believe that we can agree that there is significant power in working together to promote global peace, stability, and prosperity. Thank you, merci.
Admiral, Major Wright.
Mr. Chair and members of Parliament, thank you very much for the invitation this afternoon to speak on global threats from the defense intelligence perspective. Prior to addressing the topic, I'd like to briefly describe my dual role as the Commander of Canadian Forces Intelligence Command, or CFINCOM, and as the Chief of Defense Intelligence. As Commander CFINCOM, I exercise command and control over the members of the Canadian Armed Forces who work in the command, and I serve as a senior military intelligence advisor to the Chief of the Defense Staff. As Chief of Defense Intelligence, I am directly accountable to the Deputy Minister, NCDS, for providing oversight and policy direction to the Defense Intelligence Enterprise to ensure its continued effectiveness, responsiveness, and accountability. Defense intelligence leverages a variety of sources to support strategic decision makers during events such as the current situation in Ukraine, to support deployed operations such as those in the Middle East, Latvia, and everywhere else around the world where the Canadian Forces is deployed. Additionally, our relationships with allies are critical to our success. Defense intelligence activities are enabled in large part by collaboration with domestic and international partners. Now, to address the topic of global threats to Canada and North America, we currently face a broad range of challenges. Great power rivalry has once again emerged as the central feature of the international strategic environment, with a revisionist and resurgent Russia and a powerful China seeking to reshape the rules-based international order in ways that support their individual national interests and their authoritarian worldviews. Increasingly, we have witnessed China and Russia enhancing their strategic cooperation in the diplomatic, economic, and military spheres. And this cooperation is occurring in many regions around the world, including in the Arctic. Beyond China and Russia, we have seen that there is a mutually reinforcing relationship between weak governance and fragile states, violent extremism, and irregular migration flows. And the resultant situations are increasingly aggravated by the impacts of climate change. This will exacerbate instability in many regions of the world over the coming years. At home, extreme weather-related events will become more severe and more frequent, including droughts, floods, and fires, putting more pressure on federal resources, including, as the Admiral said, the Canadian Armed Forces. As we have all witnessed over the last 2 years, the emergence of new pathogens, coupled with the threat of pandemics, could also further exacerbate political, social, and economic instabilities. Cyber threats are growing, and offensive cyber programs have been used by states to target Canadian assets, including the financial sector, critical infrastructure, and democratic institutions via influence activities and propaganda, or in other words, information warfare. Finally, state and non-state actors are investing in military technologies and weapon systems. Notably, they are increasingly pursuing their agendas using hybrid methods in the gray zone that exists just below the threshold of armed conflict, including foreign influence, cyber, and espionage operations. Mr. Chair, this concludes my presentation. Thank you again for the opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General Wright. First question is Mr. Mott's. That's a 6-minute round, but I see that the likelihood is we've got about 18 minutes left, and we got 4 people trying to do 6 minutes. The math doesn't work. So if I made it a 4-minute round, okay?
Yep. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, both witnesses, for your service and for being here today. Vice Admiral, SAJOC leads most CAF operations in Canada and around the world, and that is no small task, as we know. We're here today, and this committee is studying the threat analysis and readiness of Canadian Armed Forces. When looking at the threats, I wanted to begin with what internal or systematic threats you face that are internal. Non-violent threats, but threats that come from maybe a lack of capacity or lack of funding or staffing. Put another way, you are provided with the best tools. Are you provided with the best tools to do the job that needs to be done properly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. And your point was bang on. As Commander CJOC, I'm responsible for the command and control of our operations domestically and internationally. And I receive forces from the Army, Navy, and Air Force, and occasionally commander of a Special Operations Forces Command. And in doing so, I'm able to meet the commitments I have globally and domestically for the operations we're currently assigned to by the Government of Canada.
Okay. So ultimately then, whose decision is it to, or what is the decision-making process, if you would please enlighten us on, to decide when to deploy Canadian Armed Forces within Canada and around the world? Maybe just a very brief overview of that.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for. And just to follow on that, and it's 2 different processes domestically and internationally. So domestically, it's quite straightforward. One of the key points I think I want to pass along is Canadian Armed Forces should be considered a force of last resort in Canada. So our provinces are strong. The union between the federal and provincial levels is quite strong. A lot of provinces have those capabilities to deal with situations generally throughout Canada. That being said, when there are issues that arise beyond the control of particularly municipalities or provinces, they went and asked the federal government for support and potentially the Canadian Armed Forces. This is done through a request for assistance from the province to the federal government, and that is then coordinated at the federal level through the Minister of Public Safety. Oftentimes, you've seen in the past 2 years, specifically during the pandemic, the Canadian Forces has been called upon to respond, and we've done that in every occasion. Internationally, depending upon where we are assigned missions based on the Government of Canada, based on our alliances and working with our partners. For example, the majority of our large missions around the globe is actually done through memoranda to cabinet. So we receive authorization and authorities from government to conduct operations globally with our partners in various regions. So, as I said, domestically, normally through that request for assistance process through provinces, and internationally through through the memoranda to cabinet.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Major General Wright, when looking at the Canadian Armed Forces or Canadian Forces National Counterintelligence Unit, it identifies, it investigates, and it counters CAF threats by foreign intelligence services, individuals or groups engaged in terrorism, espionage, sabotage, subversion, or organized criminal activities that impact both DND and CAF. So in your perspective, what would be the top 2 or 3 of these that you identify and or counter regularly?
Sure, thank you for the question. So I would say the top 2 threats are the 2 threats that I mentioned during my presentation. Russia and China, both of which have aggressive foreign intelligence services. Also, although it is not strictly within the it is not only the Canadian Forces National Counterintelligence Unit that is responsible. We are also dealing with issues with ideologically motivated violent extremism within the Canadian Armed Forces, and they are part of the group within the Canadian Armed Forces who is working on that.
Thank you, Mr. Motz. Mr. Fisher, 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Certainly appreciate your expertise that you're providing to our committee today. I also want to thank you for the role you played in COVID, the distribution of vaccines, and you know, I have to tell you, I'm very, very proud of our Canadian Armed Forces. Thinking about, Mr. Motz talked about capacity, talked about capability. I'm curious about the Canadian capabilities that we are offering to Ukraine and NATO, and whether they supplement what other allies are bringing forward. And you know, I think about the coordination, the areas where Canada maybe has more capacities than some of our other allies, or maybe more capability. What do we bring to the table, you know, as it compares to some of our other allies? I guess that's for you, Admiral.
And thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. I think you hit it on the head when you're talking about allies. This is not Canada in isolation. This is Canada working with our allies and partners around the globe. Specifically in this, we've been working with our partners in Ukraine since 2015 to support the Ukrainian Armed Forces and assist in the training of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. At this particular time, we're now working with our NATO partners to consolidate and support not only the Ukrainians, but actually the NATO alliance. And I think my colleague who you're going to have next, Admiral Bishop, is probably most suited to talk about the NATO alliance. He's actually our Canadian military rep in NATO right now. But the fact is, your point to highlight that is, it is a partnership working with our allies and partners to ensure that we're providing support across the NATO alliance and to make sure that we actually have the capabilities required by NATO to defend, shield, and if necessary, to deter, shield, and if necessary, defend.
Thank you very much for that. You know, when you think about the Canadian Armed Forces, you think about, you know, peacekeepers, certainly for decades, but under the current and what you see as future threat environment, what does that mean for the design or the transition for the Canadian Armed Forces? You know, you think about cyber, peacekeeping, combat, training, foreign interference, misinformation. It's a different world than even 5, 6, 7 years ago when we were on this Defense Committee.
Yes, thank you again, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that. And that's a great question. And really, the question is, what capabilities does Canada have to have, not necessarily the Canadian Armed Forces? And I'll just expand on that. I think what you're seeing is, what you're seeing play out today is nations using all instruments of national power. And then the military having capabilities across all warfare domains. And in terms of all instruments of national power, making sure that our diplomatic efforts are aligned with our military efforts, are aligned with our economic efforts, and are aligned with our information efforts. So you're seeing information and disinformation being used globally right now, and I'll turn to my colleague, Major General Wright, for that. But the point is, all aspects of national power are being used to coalesce. On the military side, what we're talking about is exactly as you just said. The world has changed in the past few decades. It's no longer a fight in just the land, sea, and air. You're seeing an all-domain fight in the traditional domains of land, sea, and air, where you need capabilities across all. Plus, you're seeing significant cyber activity, significant activity in space, and significant activity in the information domain. So the cyber domain, the space domain, and the information domain are all contested domains, just like the land, sea, and air are.
And so I'm going to stop it there and ask Madame Normandine, 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you very much to both of you for your appearance and for your service. My first question, we've understood that by sending the 100, 125, the numbers are different depending on the sources, that the government has delved into the stocks of the units, but it doesn't strike me as exactly clear. Have we really used the stocks of the training schools to send this equipment to Ukraine?
Thank you again, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam, for the question. It's a great question because what we're talking about are capabilities that we're going to provide to the Ukraine, and these capabilities are coming from Canada as decided by the government of Canada. So with respect to your question, are these taking these out of the training system? These are actually stocks that we hold within the Canadian Armed Forces. A decision has been made to actually furnish these to the Ukrainian Armed Forces for their use in the conflict with Russia. So they have been taken from Canadian Forces stocks, which we are working at right now to move. And that point is the same across other. There are the considerations, as you've seen, the government of Canada has made several announcements recently. You've seen our minister and the Prime Minister making announcements with respect to support to Ukraine. This is but one of them, and we are intending to meet that requirement.
Merci. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. That brings me to a second question. We've noticed how important it is out in the field to have modern weapons, anti-tank weapons, javelin, Stinger kind weapons, and I understand even though they're useful and operational, some of the equipment is outdated. So that begs the question, does Canada have what it needs to undertake a conventional war if necessary?
Thank you again, Madam, and thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a great question. The intent is Canada is providing significant aid. You've seen the aid we provided, both lethal and non-lethal, and that has been provided to Ukraine already with 2 deliveries that I think has been publicly broadcast. In addition, right now, we are looking at other options to provide further military equipment that is within our arsenal, that is modern and capable to defeat the Russian forces if used by the Ukrainians. So this is something the government's looking at right now, is to make sure that we're providing aid. And I have to say, this is not in isolation. Working with our allies and partners globally, I think you've seen the allies and partners all looking to provide Ukrainians with capable equipment and capabilities that they need to support their sovereignty.
Okay. Mais ma question était plus par...
But my question is more to do with Canada. Is it able to undertake a conventional war? Are our resources inadequate to undertake a conventional war, or do we have everything that we need for conventional warfare?
Yeah, I think, thank you again, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam, for the question. I think we're talking about the capabilities, and we're talking about whether they're sufficient to support the Ukrainians, and they are, and that's why we're offering those capabilities, and as well as our allies.
With all due respect, Vice Admiral, my question isn't do we have everything we need to support the Ukrainians? Do we have everything we need to undertake a conventional warfare ourselves?
So exactly. So we are looking not only to support the Ukrainians, but ensuring that we have the capabilities within our brigades and with our armed forces to moving forward, and we do. So we have identified equipment in order to support the Ukrainians, at the same time ensuring that we have capabilities available for Canada.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Normandine, Madame Matheson, 4 minutes, please.
Thank you so much to both witnesses and for your service. I repeat sort of what all my colleagues I know we feel in terms of that support. I think I kind of wanted to expand on what Madame Normandine was talking about in a conversation about the necessary tools required. Minister Anand has stated that we've been watching Russian escalation for months, and I wanted to ask about that current state of surveillance specifically, the necessary tools, and then, of course, what we are going to be putting into NORAD and the equipment, the improvements to and investments into NORAD.
Mr. Chair, perhaps I could take the first part of that question regarding how we've been tracking the situation in Ukraine over the past several months, because really that highlights the importance of the relationships with our allies, and particularly with the Five Eyes. So it was about the middle of October that amongst the Five Eyes, we started to receive the reporting of the extremely large buildup of Russian forces surrounding Ukraine. And as you saw over the course of December, January, and February, a large amount of that, what had been highly classified intelligence, was actually declassified by the originators, in the most part, the United States, to provide to the international community, to show them what Russia was doing, and to show them that this war, this invasion, was completely the choice of Vladimir Putin.
Hey, and thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam, for the question. And I'll talk specifically about continental defense and NORAD modernization. I think this is, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the rise of strategic competition, changing threats to the continent, and the effects of climate change and the growing importance of Canada Arctic require us to strengthen our domestic and our continental defenses. I think just what you're talking about. We're already investing in personnel, equipment, and infrastructure to support this effort. And Canada and the United States are also working together to modernize the North American Aerospace Defense Command. I think last year, in late August, Canada and the United States issued a joint statement identifying the 4 shared priorities for NATO moving forward in terms of strengthening situational awareness, modernizing the command and control systems, enhancing capabilities and infrastructure, particularly in the Arctic, and advancing research, development, and innovation.
As I think about, and Canada's been a part of the calls for the International Criminal Court to start to investigate what's going on in Ukraine, we're seeing, of course, a rise in destruction, targeting of civilians. Through that intelligence gathering and that surveillance, are we documenting the attacks on civilians? How are we doing that right now with the Russian forces?
So thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. What I can tell you is that the intelligence community, specifically the Five Eyes, but also NATO and all other intelligence communities with like-minded nations, are looking very closely with the resources that we have. It's challenged in that we have no resources on the ground, but through a combination of geospatial intelligence, signals intelligence, all the other disciplines of closely tracking any illegal contrary to the law of armed conflicts activities which may be undertaken by Russian forces.
And I hope that I can fit it in. So a lot of people who have come to this committee in the discussion about this, the study, have talked about China watching this situation and the response from the Western countries with regard to the Ukrainian conflict. Do you believe that the response, our response so far, has given China pause or has impacted their reaction in any way?
Mr. Chair, I would say that prior to a week ago, we were very concerned about China and, in fact, wondering if China would take the opportunity to accelerate their own plans for greater control of their near abroad, specifically Taiwan. I would hope that with the reaction of the international community and specifically NATO and the West, that China would have pause for any of their authoritarian plans in the future.
Thank you. That completes the first round of questions. I think I have to suspend in 2 minutes? Yeah, definitely before that. 2 minutes and 54 seconds. Okay. Colleagues, what I think we should do at this point is release Admiral Auchterlonie. I don't know about General Wright's plans, and then we will go off and vote, or stay and vote, as the case may be, and then resume as quickly as we can after the vote is made. Is that satisfactory procedure to all? Okay.
Mr. Chair, excuse me, would it be possible to invite General Wright to the second panel?
Are you available, General Wright?
I can be available. Yes, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. So we'll have 3 panels. We'll have the three people on the panel. We'll invite Admiral Bishop and Ambassador Angel to present, and then we'll have another round of questions, and we'll run that as far as we possibly can.
Mr. Chair, can I get one? Mr. Chair, can I get one question in with Vice Admiral before we suspend?
Sorry, what? A minute and a half. I'll give you a 30-second question only because you're a nice guy, Todd.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate both of our witnesses being here. Vice Admiral, are we prepared, and what is the plan should the war be brought to our shores, whether missiles being fired overhead or indeed an attack, missiles landing here in Canada?
Admiral
Thank
could
you,
be
Mr. Chair,
forgiven. I think the Admiral could be forgiven for not answering that question. That is a huge, huge question. So let him answer.
Yes,
You
30
think you can
seconds
wind
is
that
tough to get that one
answer
in.
back in 15 seconds?
I think I will give it a short try. I think we've already alluded to it. The fact is, we don't just work alone in Canada. We work with our allies and partners. We have a strong relationship with NORAD. We have a strong relationship with our partners in NATO, and we have a strong partnership with our other government departments, the government of Canada. So it is not a necessarily military response, but a whole of government response working with our allies and partners. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And again, thank you, Admiral Archuloni. General Wright, we'll look forward to seeing you on the other side of the vote. With that, meeting is suspended. joined by Admiral Scott Bishop. Good to see you again, Admiral Bishop. I'm not sure how many years ago it was, but it is good to see you. And Ambassador Angel, good to see you as well. Thank you for joining us at this late hour. I'm advising the committee that we have a hard stop at 5:30, which I think we'll be able to achieve. And I'm recognizing Madame Normandine, who has a statement to make, and then I'll call upon the two of you for your opening statements. And I appreciate General Wright staying around for the fun.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. Very quickly, I just want this to be said out loud and in the record, given the number of votes taking place today. Just a reminder for the attention of clerks and all those who organise the schedule of committees, one shouldn't assume that because we can vote remotely that we are automatically going to avail ourselves of that possibility. More than often, I will be voting in person. Just a reminder that the schedule shouldn't factor that in solely, that we be voting remotely, because I'm sure there are a lot of members who will be voting in person.
With that, if I could move to Admiral Bishop for his opening. Sorry? Oh, I'm sorry. Not according to my order here, but I guess A does come before B. So, Ambassador Angel, for an opening 5-minute statement, and I just, on behalf of the committee, I want to recognize that this is 6 hours behind us, and you have made special arrangements to be here, and we do appreciate it. And I have only a remote appreciation of how hard you are working on behalf of us all. So I think we need to recognize that you are really in the center of things these days, and we appreciate your work.
Chair, thank you for your comments and for the opportunity to join you. My name is David Angel, and I'm the Canadian ambassador to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. NATO is a defensive alliance founded on the principles of democracy, individual liberty, and rule of law. Its task is to guarantee the security of the Euro-Atlantic area and of the nearly 1 billion citizens of the now 30 allied countries. Canada was an architect of NATO, which has remained a cornerstone of our security for 7 decades, and we continue to play a leadership role within the alliance. For example, we have led the Enhanced Forward Presence Battle Group in Latvia since its inception, and we were the founding framework nation for the NATO mission in Iraq. Our role within NATO reflects our values, including our commitment to diversity and pluralism. Recently, Canada's 3 most senior NATO commanders were all women, a demonstration of commitment to gender equality that no other ally can match. NATO's strength derives from its ability to adapt in a constantly changing geostrategic environment. NATO is involved in a far-reaching reform process, NATO 2030, to ensure that it remains fit for purpose. A milestone in that process will be the adoption by leaders in June of a new capstone strategic concept, which will chart a path forward for NATO for the next decade or so. NATO's strength also draws upon the unity of its allies, all of whom committed under Article 5 of the Washington Treaty that an armed attack against one should be considered an attack against them all. Alliance unity and adaptability have both been evident in response to Russia's violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. Following Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, NATO developed far-reaching new defense plans and arrangements to defend alliance territory and deepened its close partnership with Ukraine. In addition, Canada trained more than 30,000 Ukrainian military personnel through our Operation Unifier, and we contributed to security sector reform in Ukraine. NATO has demonstrated extraordinary unity in responding to the present crisis, offering Russia a credible diplomatic track to avert the crisis and championing unprecedented sanctions once that diplomatic option was spurned. In addition, NATO preemptively implemented enhanced vigilance measures and activated its advanced planning mechanisms to shore up its deterrence posture, while individual allies are providing unprecedented support to Ukraine. Throughout this crisis, the alliance has remained united and faithful to its values. Allies are also following closely China's activities to understand their implications for Euro-Atlantic security, without seeking either to cast China as an adversary or to close off cooperation in key areas such as responding to climate change. China's opacity in implementing its far-reaching military modernization is cause for concern. So too is China's growing military cooperation with Russia, including joint exercises. NATO is working to respond to these challenges in cooperation with close partners such as Australia, Japan, Korea, and New Zealand. L'Alliance s'enforce également.
The alliance is looking to transnational threats. The alliance participated actively in combating ISIS and developed an action plan against international terrorism, which is updated on an annual basis. NATO also faces a global context where emerging new technologies and hybrid activities are changing the very nature of warfare. NATO's Diana is a concrete example of the cooperation between allies to protect the alliance's technological advancements. NATO and its various allies are coming to grips with increased exposure to cyber activities and malware in a world that depends and relies on these technologies. To deal with this, allies need to continue to work hand in hand in close collaboration. The allies are fully aware of the impacts of climate change on global security as an amplifier of threats and the importance of reducing greenhouse gas emissions from our military equipment so that we can meet our climate change objectives. Canada was also a global leader in that area. At the summit of NATO that was held in Brussels in June, the Prime Minister proposed that Canada have a centre of excellence for NATO on climate, on security. This initiative will significantly advance the work of the alliance in this crucial domain. Mr. Chairperson, NATO has never been as relevant and united as it is today. Canada's contribution remains essential.
Committee, and by acknowledging with particular thanks those who serve or have served as members of the Canadian NATO Parliamentary Association. I look forward to responding to your questions.
Ambassador Angel, Admiral Bishop, 5 minutes, please. Unfortunately, we don't seem to have any sound.
How is that?
That's much better. That is much better. Okay.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to appear before the committee today and answer your questions. I think Ambassador Angel has done an excellent job giving you a high-level overview of NATO and Canada's role in NATO and some of the challenges that we face. I wanted to take just a couple of minutes just to vector in on what I do at NATO, just to give you some context in terms of my function here. Je suis le vice-amiral Scott Bishop.
My name is Scott Bishop, and I am the Canada's military representative on the Canadian Joint Delegation to NATO. Our delegation is a joint effort of the Department of National Defence and Global Affairs Canada, and my name is Vice Admiral Scott Bishop. I'm the Canadian military representative. I have several responsibilities, but my primary role is to represent the Chief of Defence Staff at the NATO Military Committee in Brussels.
Most senior of NATO's 3 military bodies and provides advice to the North Atlantic Council, which is NATO's highest political authority. The other 2 military bodies are first Supreme Allied Commander Europe, known as SACEUR, and their staff at Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, located in Mons, Belgium, and referred to as SHAPE. SACEUR is responsible for planning and execution of all of NATO's operations. Second, the Supreme Allied Commander Transformation referred to as SAC-T, and their staff at Allied Command Transformation Headquarters located in Norfolk, Virginia, which we refer to as ACT. SAC-T is responsible for ensuring that the alliance is evolving and transforming itself to be relevant in the conflicts of the future. In the military committee, I work with the senior military representatives of all of our alliance partners to provide military advice to the North Atlantic Council on a wide range of military issues. This includes the review and endorsement of the military planning undertaken by both SACEUR and SAC-T. From a national perspective, I work closely with key stakeholders in National Defense Headquarters in Ottawa to ensure that D&D and Canadian Armed Forces interests and perspectives are included in the military's planning and decision-making. We also work very closely with our global affairs colleagues in our joint delegation to NATO to ensure that we remain closely aligned on our national positions. Defense diplomacy is also a key aspect of our work at NATO headquarters, and we regularly work with allies to gain support for Canada's views amongst the other military delegations.
Furthermore, our position at NATO headquarters gives us a privileged point of view to understand the major issues that drive the alliance. We are therefore able to relay these important considerations to Defence Headquarters in order to inform the discussions in Ottawa. In recent times, our efforts have been focused on Canada's active contribution to NATO's response to Russia's aggression against Ukraine, providing input into SACEUR's deterrence and defence plans, promoting greater transparency and accountability in the development of NATO's capabilities, advancing climate and security initiatives, promoting the role of women in peace and security issues, and advocating the importance of innovation within the alliance.
For the opportunity to give you a brief summary of what I do here, and I look forward to addressing the questions of the committee tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral Bishop. Go to the 6-minute round. Madame Gallant, Madame Lambropoulos, Madame Normandine, and Madame Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, recently, and this is for His Excellency Angel, the Secretary General said Article 5 could be invoked in the event of a cyber attack. Now, would NATO need confirmed attribution for that to be triggered?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I said in my introduction that NATO is constantly adapting, and one demonstration of that is the incorporation of both cyber and space as new domains. So NATO is now active across 5 domains, including land, sea, and air as well. It was decided by the alliance that a cyber attack could trigger Article 5, which is the article of the Washington Treaty under which we're committed each to support each other militarily. Joint attribution would not be required. Joint attribution being the public indication of who is responsible for an attack, which for many allies is something that's done nationally rather than on a joined-up basis. But there would have to be consensus, because all of NATO's decisions are done on a consensus basis, that Article 5 needed to be tripped.
What would the nature of the attack, a cyber attack, have to be? Would it need to be damage to critical infrastructure? Would it have to be something that caused loss of life? What is that threshold that needs to be met for it to be triggered?
Mr. Chair, the threshold would be very high. Article 5 has been triggered only once in the alliance's 72 or 73 years. That was in response to the 9/11 attack in the United States. There is no specific written definition of the criterion that would need to be satisfied, but it would involve certainly loss of life and massive military impact. And it's something that we are discussing in terms of trying to codify a bit more clearly, but it's very clear that there would be a requirement for loss of life and massive impact.
So there are growing calls for a no-fly zone in the airspace above Ukraine. is there any way at all that Allied forces could police the perimeter without in becoming involved and in some way triggering a war and be considered a provocation and a pretext for Putin to go all out?
Mr. Chair, the Secretary General has been speaking, I think, for the vast majority of allies in expressing enormous concern at the possibility of a no-fly zone. And some leaders of some of our largest allies, including the American president, have been very clear on this point as well. The concern is that if NATO were to be involved in the enforcement of a no-fly zone over Ukraine, first of all, it would involve putting our service personnel in a position where they would risk interacting with Russian personnel. And so linked to that, and second, would create a situation where there was very significant risk of escalation. And so alliance leaders have been quite clear that enforcement of a no-fly zone is not something that is being considered at the moment.
And for Admiral Bishop, we have Turkey that is looking at invoking the Montreux Agreement. And I'm wondering, from Canada's standpoint, would we see that as effective? Would it be possible that in some way our naval forces would be assisting in that? How effective do you see invoking that to be?
I think it is a welcome measure. I think this is an attempt by Turkey to try to make sure that the conflict does not escalate. They're exercising the provisions of the Montreux Treaty, which they're the treaty holder for. So I think it is very positive. I don't think it is going to have a significant impact on the Royal Canadian Navy's operations in support of NATO. At this time, as I understand it, there's no intention for RCN units to operate in the Black Sea.
Okay. And in terms of what Canada has to contribute to this overall defense of Ukraine and our allies, is there anything that we don't have that we should have, or in hindsight we should start working on so for the future we have the capability? And what further measures can we be taking now to harden the defenses should the conflict spread beyond the borders of Ukraine?
Well, what I would say is that NATO has been preparing since 2014 in Russia's annexation of the Crimea and their first invasion of the Ukraine. We've been very concerned with the potential for Russian aggression towards NATO. There's been a lot of work that has been done by SACEUR in terms of developing plans to be able to respond to Russian aggression. Those plans are called graduated response plans. There's 5 of them, and all 5 of these plans were activated by SACEUR with the approval of the North Atlantic Council last week. That is enabled SACEUR to significantly reinforce the nations that are on the eastern flank of NATO in accordance with those plans. And a number of nations, including Canada, have taken measures to reinforce the existing forces that they maintain in those areas. And for Canada, that's obviously our battle group in Latvia. The government has already announced further reinforcing capabilities for that battle group. And this is very consistent with what all of our allies are doing. New battle groups are being created in the southeastern part of the alliance, including in Romania, Bulgaria, Slovakia, and Hungary. These are all measures that SACEUR has taken to demonstrate to Russia NATO's resolve and NATO's intent to make sure that we keep alliance partners safe.
And we're going to, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave the answer there. Thank you. Madame Lambropoulos, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for being here with us today and answer our questions. One of my main questions, I guess, is if a NATO country were to attack another NATO country during this time where NATO allies have to be very much united in order to, be strong in the face of Russia, how would NATO take that? What would be the way to go about it? And I guess I'm specifically referring to Turkey not necessarily following international law and not necessarily doing things according to the way that they're supposed to at this point in time. They've been flying into Greek airspace and have been, I guess, sort of aggressive and possibly taking advantage of the world looking elsewhere. Do you have any comments on that or anything you can say about that?
Vassar, I defer to you.
I'll be very quick and then turn over to you, Admiral. What I would say, Mr. Chair, is that where we have had tensions between allies in the past, including in particular between Turkey and Greece as an example, the Secretary General has very quickly put in place deconfliction mechanisms involving the two parties speaking offline, in this case at a military level, and these have proven to be very effective. So, we are an alliance of 30 countries. Inevitably, there's a little bit of bumping into each other from time to time, but we have always, without fail, over more than 70 years, found ways to deconflict the rare instance of friction between us.
And Mr. Chair, I would just add that throughout the lead up to this crisis, consistent message from the Secretary General that all nations have adhered to is the importance of NATO unity. And I would say that in the face of this blatant, unprovoked invasion of Ukraine by Russia, I don't think I've ever seen the 30 nations in NATO more united than they are right now.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Thank you. Another question I have is when looking at the situation in Ukraine right now, I think Canadians obviously feel a lot of emotion for the Ukrainian people. It's devastating to see what's happening. But they also feel fear because they don't know what Putin's next step is. And he's made some pretty big threats, that if anybody gets involved, we're going to see something that we've never seen in our history. So how is NATO taking to these threats? What exactly are we doing? And how can Canada better prepare itself if ever, we are sending a lot of military equipment. We are helping Ukraine in the best ways that we can without going to war with Russia. In what other ways can we protect ourselves and better, put ourselves in a better position with regards to NATO?
Why don't I take a run, Mr. Chair, and then turn to the Vice Admiral. SACIR has implemented some extraordinarily robust deterrence measures, and we are very clear, every ally, and this has been enunciated clearly by the Secretary General and by SACIR, that every inch of alliance territory will be defended. And these very robust defensive plans the Vice Admiral spoke to a moment ago are being implemented. We're moving huge numbers of troops forward, setting up much stronger defenses on the eastern flank. There are no indications at all that Russia is looking to provoke a fight with NATO, but we're a defensive alliance and we're putting in place the necessary defenses. The rhetoric about putting nuclear forces on alert has been described as reckless, and it's certainly unnecessary. This is the essence of deterrence. We are a nuclear alliance, and we are willing to signal our resolve to defend every inch of alliance territory.
Mr. Chair, I think the ambassador has said it well. I have nothing to add to that.
So much. And I guess you guys, you represent Canada within NATO, if I understand correctly. And so if you can just say, is Canada doing enough to be considered an equal NATO partner, and what can we be doing more? There is a federal budget coming up. Is there anything with regards to NATO in particular that should be taken into account in that?
Canada is one, Mr. Chair, Canada is one of the founders of NATO, and we have been in a position of leadership from the outset, and it's a responsibility we take very seriously. In the case of Ukraine, as an example, we have been out in front for many years. Our Operation Unifier was in place when it was only Canada, the US, and UK providing training. We supported very actively security sector reform together with a small number of allies. But within the alliance, we're an extremely creative member where we have extraordinarily capable armed forces. And we are present to do heavy lifting. And our role in Latvia, our role in Iraq are examples of that. So yes, we're very confident of our role within the alliance. We're also leaders in cutting edge issues, and the work we're doing on climate and security is an example of that. And we're leaders on values issues. And the work that the Vice Admiral spoke to in terms of championing women, peace, and security is an example of that.
Thank you, Ms. Lambropoulos. Before I call on Madame Normandin, if I don't get a unanimous resolution to proceed, we will have to end this round and end the session at Ms. Matheson, and maybe we'll have to cut back Ms. Matheson. So do I have a unanimous resolution to carry on up until the point where we have to go off and vote? You fine with that?
Is it possible to give us just enough time to go over there without the entire 30 minutes, that is?
The vote is likely going to get called at 5 o'clock. 6 and 6 is 5 o'clock. If we get, in order to get to a second round, I need a unanimous resolution from everyone. Do we have a unanimous resolution? Okay, good. Madame Normandin, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you to both the witnesses for their attendance and their presentations. I intended to ask questions, as Ms. Gallant did, on cyber attacks. I'd like to dig down and drill down a little deeper because I've got a good basis to work from here. You have established what the threshold would be for a cyber attack to, in fact, trigger a reply from NATO. But what we're noticing is that there are often attacks against member countries that remain unresponded to because the rogue countries claim that they weren't the bad actors, and because also we haven't reached the threshold to respond necessarily. For example, did the Bridgestone attack warrant a conventional military response? So to avoid groups like anonymous and private groups, in fact, going and doing this in a vigilante way, well, wouldn't NATO engage in a counter-response in terms of a cyber attack of its own, and therefore the threshold would be less than from a cyber attack that would cause deaths per se?
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, for the question. Well, let me respond to that. As far as NATO's capacity is concerned, we have a cyber offensive capacity. But that is something that we engage in on a very rare basis.
We're a values-based alliance, and we're a defensive alliance. And so engaging in the kind of irresponsible offensive cyber activities that we see some of our would-be adversaries engaging in, it's not something that we're willing to do. We have the capacity, but it's not something we're willing to do. What we do try to do is call out through attribution, which is primarily a national responsibility. You do have examples of joined up attribution, and Canada is very often part of those. It's an approach that we support, but there are allies that prefer to see national attribution, and so it's something that is proceeded on a case-by-case basis. Okay. But we did see it in terms of the cyber attacks in the UK, for example.
Okay. Well, just to bridge on your answer, are you afraid that there's going to be some level of disgruntlement given that private entities might be attacked. We know where the attack is coming from, and these are private computer hackers who, in fact, claim responsibility. In North Korea, a hacker was able to paralyze the network. So if NATO doesn't get involved, aren't we at risk of losing control over our response? And will end up benefiting groups like Anonymous, for example.
I'm not an expert in cyber, but in most cases, the response is led by individual allies. And so where a country has been the subject of an attack, generally they lead on the response. They can turn to allies for assistance. We have put in place a capacity to provide support to allies who request it. So some allies who don't have cyber capacity, cyber defense capacity as robust as that of some others can ask for assistance and receive it, and that is now operational. But in many instances, the response has been a national lead, and that's something that's entirely okay.
To respond.
Mr. Chair, I would like to just add that NATO is an alliance of nations, and generally NATO relies on individual nations to bring capabilities, including cyber capabilities, to support NATO. And in a lot of these instances, dealing with these cyber attacks is done on a national level by individual nations. I think where NATO gets involved is when we get into an Article 4 or an Article 5 discussion about a particularly severe cyber incident that might warrant a NATO response, for which NATO would look to nations who had those capabilities, including Canada, to potentially respond.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. On the more conventional side of warfare now, Russia still hasn't claimed air supremacy in Ukraine. Apparently, they intended to achieve that within 15 days, but there's a strong resistance on the ground. How can Canada bolster that resistance when it comes to avoiding air supremacy being gained by Russia?
Mr. Chair, I can offer some words on this. Just from a NATO perspective, there are many nations that are offering military aid to Ukraine. The kinds of aid that are being offered are in some cases are quite significant, and some countries are offering weapons and systems to deal with air threats. At this point, Canada is not in that group of nations, but from a NATO perspective, it's not a NATO function to provide military aid to Ukraine, but individual nations within NATO are providing Ukraine with military aid that spans a spectrum of capability.
Madame Normandin, I see lights are flashing. We have a motion to carry on. How much time do we have, Mr. Clerk, to carry on? 29 minutes.
30, but.
Okay, so Madame Matheson will go for 6 minutes. Yeah. And then we'll have to have a truncated second round. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We continue to see Russian advancements west towards the NATO countries. Those eastern borders are moving west. And I would like to ask, if the Russians are able to hold that territory, what are the long-term consequences and considerations, I guess, from the NATO allies?
I can take a first stab, Mr. Chair, then turn to the Vice Admiral. In response to the illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014, we began to reinforce the eastern flank, and the enhanced forward presence battle groups in the Baltic countries and Poland, one of which we lead, are part of that response. But there are many other elements as well, including air policing that we participate in as well. What we have begun to do in response to this new, more severe violation of Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity is shore up those eastern flank defenses. And that will continue for as long as it's required, Mr. Chair. And SACIR has done an outstanding job of leading the alliance in reinforcing that flank. We're doing that in part through standing up new EFP-like battle groups, but also through movement of troops and a whole range of other measures. So if there is a longer-term risk to NATO's eastern flank, there will be a much longer-term reinforcement of NATO's reinforcement of that flank.
Mr. Chair, I think this is an excellent question. I would just highlight that NATO is in the midst of updating its strategic concept. This is something that the leaders will decide on in the Madrid summit in June. I think what we're seeing, regardless of how things play out in Ukraine, is going to have a significant impact on the development of that strategic concept. And I think this is already generating a lot of discussions in NATO about how we need to examine our defense and deterrence posture, particularly along the eastern flank. And I think there is going to be a call from many of our allies, particularly those who are in that eastern part of the alliance, for NATO to take a serious look at a significant increase in the capabilities that NATO maintains along the borders with Russia and along NATO's eastern flank. But those discussions are already starting, and I think this will have a significant impact on NATO, regardless of the outcome in Ukraine, because it's showed Russia's hand in terms of being an unpredictable and irresponsible actor on the international stage, is willing to take extraordinary and irresponsible risks and violate international law. So it is going to have an impact.
So Canada has already given quite a lot and supplied, made a lot of commitments through Operation Unifier, Operation Reassurance. Do those operations shift as we come into that Madrid summit or into those conversations going forward in that long term?
Mr. Chair, both of those plans, Operation Unifier and Operation Reassurance, first of all, they both offer a degree of flexibility. And so the government is able to introduce new steps within the terms of those operations as circumstances change. And as with all military plans, they come up for renewal by cabinet, and so the approach can be fine-tuned by cabinet. Operation Unifier was just renewed for a further 3-year period. It's deliberately flexible, so we've been able to do some training. We'll be able to do a whole range of things under both of those plans, but the flexibility is there, and the renewal process allows for a degree of redesign as necessary.
Okay. I think a little bit of a shift, and maybe back to Major General Wright. He's been patiently listening. Yesterday, we saw the targeting of the Ukrainian television stations, cutting off of the communications infrastructure in an effort to silence Ukraine. Are there ways that Canada can help in that sort of surveillance or logistical framework repair that communications infrastructure? What logistical support can we provide? But also, and I guess this may be for a couple of the witnesses, but more so with Major General Wright in mind, there's been a real shift with the added pervasiveness of social media in this conflict, particularly. I mean, across the world in so many different ways, but with this particularly, how does that change what we do on the ground as well?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think I'll start with the last portion. How does it change? Well, modern warfare has changed by the fact that we are seeing things, and perhaps it began with the Gulf War in 1991. We are seeing things transpire, events transpire in real time. Certainly, I think it is good because we are seeing the lies that were perpetrated by the Russians and by President Putin be called out as lies, and the fact that they are still not telling the truth through Russian media to their own citizens. In terms of your question about repairing the television station, that's not something that falls within my scope. I'm sorry, I can't answer that.
We have a limited amount of time left. If we're going to get through a full round of second questions, I think we're going to have to go down to 3 minutes each. Madam Finley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. I'll be quick. Vice Admiral Bishop, have you seen indications that Belarusian forces have entered the war on Russia's side and are moving toward Kiev?
Thank you, Chair. This is something that we are actively monitoring in NATO. I would say that we are getting extremely good support from across the different nations in alliance who provide the alliance with all of our intelligence. And we are particularly proud of the contributions of Canadian Forces Intelligence Command. Thus far, we have not seen any of those indications, but we are very concerned about some of the open source reporting, and we are very closely watching for that.
Seen any unusual submarine activity by Russia in terms of the alert status of its ballistic missile submarines?
Mr. Chair, what I could say on that subject is that NATO is very carefully watching all aspects of Russia's military forces. NATO has a 360-degree view of threats facing the alliance. We are not solely focused on what is going on in Ukraine, and we, again, relying on all of our allies to provide intelligence to the alliance, looking at every area where Russia operates.
Ambassador, how would you characterize Canada's relationship with other NATO countries on the 2% of GDP funding issue?
The 2% funding issue is part of Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. The 2% funding issue is part of a package of commitments that leaders entered into in 2014, commitments to work towards spending 2% of GDP on defense, and then commitments relating to capacity as well, and to invest and actually doing the necessary in terms of military heavy lifting. Canada continues to make a very substantial contribution in terms of actual heavy lifting, putting our troops where they need to be. Under this strong, secure, engaged defense policy, we've been increasing our defense expenditure by 70% over a 10-year period. And that has resulted in Canada being amongst the allies with the largest actual increase in defense expenditure. At the moment, I think it's about half of allies that have a plan to reach 2%. We have a commitment to increase the defense expenditure, but not over the 2% line by 2024.
Have we met the 2%? Yes or no? Yeah.
No, we've increased expenditure by 70%, but we do not have a plan for 2%.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Spengman, 3 minutes, please.
Chair, thank you very much. I'd like to thank all three witnesses for being with us, for their service to our nation. My question is for Ambassador Angel, and it may in part take you back, sir, to your former role as DG for International Organizations, Human Rights and Democracy. I'm looking at an Instagram post from Amnesty International issued, I think, in the last 36 hours, indicating incidents of attacks against civilian infrastructure, including explosive weapon strikes on a kindergarten, a hospital, a restaurant, an apartment block, cluster munitions hitting a nursery and kindergarten, and then multiple MLRS rocket hits in urban areas. Amnesty, in the caption to that post, states the following. It says, Amnesty International's Crisis Evidence Lab analyzed digital evidence, including photos, videos, and satellite imagery of indiscriminate attacks in Ukraine. They have verified violations of international law, which could amount to war crimes. When we're talking about military deterrence, economic deterrence, and introducing this additional deterrence of judicial accountability, how important is this evidence? How can this evidence be protected and presented in such a way that it's credible in front of an international tribunal? And is there a role for NATO in that respect to either generate, preserve, and protect, or communicate onward that kind of evidence in a forward-looking way to create accountability for the Putin regime for the actions it's currently perpetrating against Ukraine?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. The question speaks to areas of Canadian leadership over many years. It was Canada that put protection of civilians in armed conflict on the Security Council agenda back in 1999. Canada was one of the principal champions for the creation of the International Criminal Court. And so this issue of accountability is something that's been very dear to our heart for a very, very long time through successive governments. There are specialist entities that capture information for judicial purposes. Whether NATO can play a role in that, I don't know. But the issue of accountability for what appears to be perpetration of war crimes is something that we will take extremely seriously, and we will want to work very closely with allies and other partners to make that happen.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I have limited time, but I'd like to turn briefly to our two senior military officials and ask if the kind of evidence that's described by Amnesty, including satellite imagery, is the kind of evidence that could capture potential war crimes well and could serve an international fora, especially if verified to be accurate, to establish and sustain accountability for these kinds of actions.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure of the exact ways which the International Criminal Court or any other organization would receive such imagery, but I can tell you that there is a significant amount of commercially available satellite imagery over Ukraine that could likely be used for a case such as that.
Vice Admiral Bishop.
Mr. Chair, I would say that it's extremely difficult to investigate these kinds of activities without people on the ground. I think that is a significant limiting factor. I think we are all seized with what we're seeing and hearing and some of the allegations about these potential war crimes and violations of the laws of armed conflict. And we certainly would like to see these issues investigated properly at some point. But in the midst of a conflict, it is always extremely difficult to conduct these types of investigation.
Madame Normandine, one minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. We've seen Russia threaten Finland with the reprisals were it to join NATO, which is not a NATO country, but it cooperates with it. What's Canada's position were Finland to end up being the subject of reprisals and retaliation? What would Canada's position be?
Thank you for the question. The choice of whether to seek to join the alliance or not is a choice that individual countries make. And for historical reasons, neither Finland nor Sweden has chosen to seek to join the alliance. Notwithstanding that, we have very close working relationships with them. We're working especially closely with them now in view of the situation in Ukraine. But these are countries with very advanced defense capabilities that have something to teach allied countries about the whole of society approaches to defense. We work extremely closely with them. We have 40 partners, and both Finland and Sweden are amongst the very closest.
Thank you. Madame Matson, 1 minute.
Almost 5. So we've seen the economic sanctions that the world is putting forward working. Russian citizens themselves are taking action against Putin. The Ukrainians are doing an incredible job of holding back, but we've also seen the Russians resorting to using thermobaric weapons, and there was a suggestion by experts that this is showing a bit of a desperation, turning to these extremes by Putin. Can you comment on that and where that could lead in terms of that level of force and response? Quickly. Sorry.
To Admiral Bishop.
Mr. Chair, within the alliance, we're following the developments in Ukraine as close as we can based on what the intelligence that we're getting from nations. And we're also, again, very concerned to hear about further escalation in terms of Russian tactics and their approach to this conflict. We would certainly be very, very concerned to hear or verify that Russia was intending to use thermobaric weapons based on their indiscriminate effects, and we'll watch for that.
3 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll start with this one first. So there's a recent article that suggested that nearly half of Canada's air fleet was not serviceable to meet readiness and training standards in 2020 and 2021. And now, we know that the current government has yet to be able to name a winning bid for the fighter jet, and that the F-35 procurement process is 7 years already in the making. Have either of you ever found, Your Excellency or Vice Admiral Bishop, have either of you ever found yourselves in a position where you were working with our allied NATO partners, trying to find other ways to assist NATO because our equipment was either not serviceable or inoperable without our allies' assistance?
Mr. Chair, I think what I would say, I can't comment on the Royal Canadian Air Force's generation of fighter aircraft and capabilities in Canada. I can talk about the NATO perspective, and I would say that Canada has been a regular contributor of fighter aircraft in support of NATO's air policing missions along the eastern flank. Canada has been a regular contributor to air policing in Romania. Our efforts there have been extremely well appreciated by all of our allied partners. This is an extremely important mission for NATO, and in particular for nations along the eastern flank. We follow their deployments in Romania when they're doing these missions, and we get a lot of credit from our allies for the great job that our men and women are doing in those missions. So from a NATO standpoint, I would say that we do not see any impact in terms of our ability to deliver to NATO what we have committed to NATO to deliver.
You referred to air, and I know my question initially referred to air, but the question was specific to equipment beyond just air. Would you stay with the same position with all of our Canadian Armed Forces equipment?
Yeah, and Chair, I'm talking specifically about what we see in NATO here in terms of what Canada delivers in terms of capability, and we do actually extremely well. I think one of our major strengths as a nation is the contributions that we make. The Alliance Ambassador highlighted that in his opening remarks. In terms of capabilities, we've got excellent capabilities in the battle group in Latvia. I've talked about how we have excelled in the air policing mission, our leadership in the NATO mission in Iraq. When we come to the table and we provide capabilities to NATO, we provide excellent high readiness capabilities that are fully mission capable. That has always been our mantra, and our allies recognize that.
I would just add, Mr. Chair, that it's also true in the naval field, where we've been leading and contributing to standing naval maritime groups very effectively.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I should have mentioned the Navy being my service.
I was going to say, Admiral, that's a major failing on your part to not mention your service. Yes.
Yeah,
which
but
I think
we are a very consistent contributor of naval forces to NATO's standing naval forces. In fact, we are one of the few countries that consistently contributes warships to those standing naval forces, and I think that is also something that gets us a lot of credit here within the NATO community.
And in the report that Mr. Motz is referring to, the Navy gets a 94% readiness for operations, so the best in class. So, Madame O'Connell, final 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again for all of you being here and your service. I wanted to actually follow up on a question that Ms. Gallant asked earlier. Vice Admiral Bishop, it's my understanding that you were involved in some of NATO's no-fly zone and embargo against Libya. And again, following up on her earlier question about some of the information coming around, often, especially online, you see, reactions to what should be done. And maybe you can elaborate on your experience in Libya and how that then relates to a no-fly zone in Ukraine or the decision-making around that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, that's another really good question. And I think what we really need to keep in mind is that the situation militarily are completely different in Libya compared to the situation in Ukraine. The big issue with a no-fly zone is that you need to be able to enforce it. And, you need to be able to prevent the side from being able to operate aircraft in that no-fly zone. And I think in Ukraine, it's just a completely different situation. The Russians have over 700 combat aircraft in that area. They have advanced surface-to-air missile systems. They have advanced integrated air defense systems. Any no-fly zone would bring us almost certainly into direct conflict with the Russian military. And as the Secretary General and many others have indicated, that this would be a really significant potential risk of escalation of the conflict, which NATO does not want to see.
Thank you. Do I have time?
A little more than a minute.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I know it's been said by many in earlier panels as well that even though what is happening in Ukraine right now is obviously of high importance, but NATO and Canada as a whole is still keeping an eye on everything else. Do you have any comment as to maybe China's activities right now? We've seen that they have been a newly formed friend with Russia, and we've heard testimony about whether or not that will last and to that effect. But is there any kind of chatter or things that Canada should be particularly watching for that while we're focused on Ukraine, whether they're supporting Russia in other ways or things that we should be watching for? Especially I know Russia and China in the Arctic have maybe competing interests. So I'm just kind of curious on that take if there's anything there.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. NATO in the past 2 years has focused a lot of attention on China to understand the implications of Chinese activities on Euro-Atlantic security. There is an enormous increase in the Chinese military capability, for example, and it's being pursued with a degree of opacity that is of concern to us. But there's also a wish to work with China, for example, on arms control. And we're trying to figure out how to do that. In the situation in Ukraine, we're certainly very conscious of the summit meeting at the outset of the Olympic Games between the presidents of China and the Russian Federation. But we're also very conscious that Ukraine historically has had a good relationship with China, and there is a possibility that China could even, if Ukraine can persuade them, can play a moderating role. And I know there's been discussion between the Ukrainian and Chinese governments. It's interesting to watch the Chinese behavior over the past week. They abstained in the General Assembly vote. They did not vote with Russia. They abstained in the Security Council vote. They did not vote with Russia. So there are some indications that the support that Russia was expecting to see from China may not be materializing. So we will watch this very, very carefully, and with the hope that China will be able to exercise a moderating influence in the Ukraine crisis, because Russia is not listening to very many countries at this point.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, could I raise a very brief point of order?
Point of order from Mr. Spengler.
We're approaching the vote, and I would like to again thank our witnesses for their testimony, their service, and also very much for their reference to the work that we're doing on women and peace and security. And I just wanted to put it to this committee that, especially as Defence Committee and the historical imbalances in gender that we have faced and are continuing to work on, that we as a committee bring gender, not necessarily gender parity, but certainly better gender representation to our panels. That's a message to my colleagues as MPs, to our support staff, anybody that's working with and for this committee, and also you gentlemen as leaders in the organisation and in our government and with NATO. If we can mobilise better gender representation, I think it will help us a great deal going forward. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that point. On behalf of the committee, I wanted to thank all three of you, particularly General Wright for his patience of being here for almost I guess it is 2 hours, and appreciate your patience and your willingness to engage. This concludes our meeting. Again, extraordinarily good witnesses with extraordinarily good information. It's been a very, very interesting study and a very timely study for us, and we appreciate your contribution. So thank you. Colleagues, before I gavel it closed, I have 2 minutes. I'll only use a minute. One, it's my intention to have a subcommittee meeting on Monday to scope out where we're going, and I think that's in agreement with all parties. And the second is I understand that there's been a motion that's been circulated and there is unanimous agreement. Am I fair to say that?
As far as I know.
As far as you know. Well, that's
everyone said yes.
You either have it or you don't. I'm going to
yes.
work on the assumption that as far as you know, that not only is as far as you know, but there is unanimous agreement to have a meeting next week. And if we do go ahead and schedule a meeting next week, I will need at the earliest possible opportunity a suggested list of witnesses, a suggested area that you want to delve into, so that the clerks and the analysts can start working on lining up panels for that time.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, can you? Maybe the witnesses can go because I know they're on a time difference and I feel bad.
Yes. I thought they had left. I was okay. Yes, particularly Admiral Bishop and Ambassador Angel. It's 11:30 where you are, and I'm sure you might be looking forward to a little shut eye. So thank you. Please.
Thank you very much.
Leave. Yes. Thanks again. I've got 30 seconds. I thought you're not even going to use 2 minutes. Anyways, so that's the plan. Mr. May, you've got 20 seconds.
Sorry. Yeah, I had the same issue that Jennifer brought up. My only other question would be pertaining to the time and date of that meeting. Just given that it's a break week, we're all going to have other commitments that we've scheduled. I just want to see if possibly Monday after the subcommittee.
I'm done.
Would be possible.
We're done, unfortunately. Please feed it into me and the clerk, and we'll try to work out what is convenient. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for your cooperation.